planning to do some comfrey management this morning, and I thought I'd make a video of it. This patch has been in a few videos talking about establishing comfrey. This was, I think, 2 years ago. We planted out these little root fragments, which we offer through the website, in this case as a rhizome barrier to keep lawn from creeping into the garden. It's worked incredibly well once it got established. I also talked about taking the comfrey and stepping it over to extend its reach and extend the flowering season. A couple different videos about that. Today what I thought I would do is go through and actually cut all of it down with the idea of stimulating another round of growth into the fall. We're at the end of August. If we can get the timing right, I think it would stimulate it to make a really nice set of flowers sometime in October for the bees, which we'll document whether that worked or not. But I also want to get a ton of mulch out of this. We'd send it all to the chickens, but there's so much of it, and currently the chickens have more food than they know what to do with. So we're gonna harvest this this go around for use to go directly in the garden as a weed suppressing fertilizing mulch. So let me get to it. One of the thoughts, so luckily I saw my neighbor just a moment ago and he's completely fine with this idea, is to cut this comfrey down, and the areas where we had pressed it over, not only is comfrey such an incredible rhizome barrier that it keeps grass from creeping in, but if you step it over, it's such a thick, intense leaf that it'll actually kill whatever grass it's over and give you bare soil. It's almost like solarizing or occlusion with plastic, but instead of plastic, we're actually just using plant material. So if I cut this, we should have a strip that we could seed out to a root crop. Let's see how that looks. So right here I cut back the tops and the leaning over parts of 3 crowns. You can see where I put in 1, 2, 3 nuggets, about 2 feet in between them, and just stuck my hoary in the ground. From a really intense sod lawn in one season, there's certainly weeds in here, but if I were to go through and scratch this up just a little bit and seed it out to a fast germinating root crop, like a radish, turnip, something along that line, I bet it would take. I think that's what we'll do today. So from just 3 crowns, we already got a mountain of greens. I'm gonna go through and do that treatment for a little ways here, and then pause and collect it and actually send it into the garden. This first area, not too bad, worth seeding out. Certainly didn't knock back all the weeds. There's some areas where there's a gap between this crown and that crown. You can see there's a fair amount of grass that went through. So this fall I'll probably plant another crown of comfrey in here just to help make it more continuous. It kept the weeds from creeping into the garden 100%, but it didn't kill everything that was growing under it. But not too bad. So, well, I'm gonna go down the line. I have a feeling once I get into this block, it should look a lot stronger. So that was a nice surprise to me. In this area where there's nicely established comfrey crown every 2 feet, and I stepped over the leaves about a month and a half ago, we've got a 2.5 foot wide band of absolutely bare, beautiful weed-free soil. That was sod up until a few weeks ago. There were 1 or 2 goldenrod stems they pulled out very easily. completely weed-free, super moist, really fertile looking. And so long as I don't go in with a shovel or a broad fork and disturb the roots of these, but rather just rake off the material and seed this out to a crop, we should be good to get another crop out of this deal while the comfrey rebounds. And I'm expecting that same treatment or same scenario right down this whole line. But the rest of this to cut, and my thought was I'm going to bring the wheelbarrow out because there's enough material here. Instead of going all the way back around and sending it back into the garden, we'll harvest all this and send it to the southern side of the garden. So my neighbor's kind enough to let me walk around and work on here. Let's go over and look. This area isn't quite their property, isn't quite ours. It's this nebulous realm. You can see where I've put currants, I've put elderberries, but the weeds are intense all through here. It's hard to mow and manage. So I think what I'll be doing is stepping all the weeds down and using the comfrey as a super deep, rich mulch around each of these plants that are kind of struggling. So I'd go through and step them over and mulch them with the comfrey, and that should really help them visually pop so that we can both manage for them in the future. So that's the plan for now. Quick side note here on the southern or uppermost edge of our garden space. Someone recently asked, hey, you planted a bunch of comfrey nuggets this spring and made a video of it. How did they work out? Well, we've got intense weed pressure on this side, and we also had a pretty intense drought through July. But that being said, almost every single one is there. They're little, but I can see them popping up. So this was with no mowing, no management, no follow-up. I trust completely that when the grasses die back this fall and over winter, the comfrey will establish more roots, and next spring it'll come up very strong and should be quite a potent rhizome barrier at that point. These are a little bit thicker. They're on their way. So I'm sure there are a few that didn't work, especially since we didn't mow in advance, we didn't mulch, we didn't water, we didn't weed. But this rhizome barrier, at least it's established and it should be able to take off and run. And so I'm continuing on taking the cuttings from the 2 years ago comfrey stand from the beginning of the video, and so far I've been able to mulch currants and elderberries very deeply with comfrey here. I'm going to continue on with that. I could definitely imagine the question or concern coming up in people's mind of, hey, you know, you're cutting this comfrey and you're using it as a mulch. Comfrey spreads like crazy. Comfrey's this horrible weed. It's going to grow everywhere up here. Well, I'll say that over 10 years of working with comfrey, any leaves that I cut above ground, laid in any context, either in a hot compost or through the chickens or just fresh and light on a mulch, on direct soil, I've never once ever seen it root and grow in this application of a chop and drop. You go in with a hoary or a shovel and you dig into the soil or do any root disturbance and move that material around, you absolutely will spread it. So if you're digging comfrey out and using it as a mulch, you will spread comfrey. But in this case, I'm completely comfortable using it the way it is. I don't expect it to spread. But of course, you know, use your own discretion. I'm going to stop here for this morning, in part because it's time for breakfast, in part because my back is a little sore, and in part because I found a whole bunch of beautiful spiders making webs in another block of the comfrey, so we'll just leave them and let them enjoy it. We don't need every last drop to be done. But this southern edge is now mulched pretty deeply. If I wanted it to look tidier, I could go through and flake out some hay or put some grass clippings on top, so maybe we will. The side benefit, side yield of all this is now all this comfrey is at the high point above our gardens. Every rain will leach more and more nutrient, which will wash down and into our gardens. So that's a pretty wonderful bonus. And we'll pause here on the chop and drop, and then Sasha and I will go through and figure out what sort of seeds we want to put into that rich soil that's now ready to go. All that cutting and moving of mulch, probably moved 10 wheelbarrow loads, and there's still all this comfrey left, but this is the area that's loaded with spider webs. Slightly more than halfway done. But we're going to pause here, maybe for the rest of the season on this cut, and we'll rake and weed out the last little bits of this, get it seeded heavily. We'll flag the edge so when they mow, they don't accidentally mow in, and we'll start managing with a push mower the very edge here so it stays nice and tidy. That's a lot of stacked function from one plant. Definite lesson learned: wherever there are gaps of more than a foot or two between the comfrey, I had a lot more weeding to do. Tons of weeds right in here because there was no comfrey right there. So this fall, I'll go through and make sure I divide and put in crowns, ideally every foot. What a plant.